Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist. Today I'm bringing you another classic original 62 book review, and then we're going to be looking at book number 26, My Hairiest Adventure. I have a lot to say about this book, but I want to start off with this because I want to stress this to you all. I used to hate this book vehemently as a kid. I think I read this book when I was around 7 or 8, one time, and I hated it. I think I checked it out from my local library. I remember getting the book, reading it that same night, and taking it immediately back to the library because I was that disappointed with it. And then I think I rechecked out the book again when I was around 12 or 13 when I got back into Goosebumps. Again for the second time when the Cartoon Network re-airings of the show came out, and I saw how bad the episode was. And I wanted to make sure that the book was as bad. And I remember thinking that it was a step up, but not by much. Now, reading it for, I think, the third time in my life, with fresh adult eyes on it, for the first time, I can say honestly, I can appreciate a lot about this book than what I did as a kid, because I went through what this book is an allegory for. If you don't know, this is one of the great allegories of Goosebumps, or the great thematic books. This is one huge way of getting across puberty, essentially. And I brought this book up in the past in some discussion videos when I talked about controversial Goosebumps stories and the top 5 most divisive Goosebumps books or stories of all time. This was on both of those installments, and for good reason. My Hairiest Adventure is one of those stories that have very differing opinions across the community. I've seen some people say they fall in love with this thing, seen some people say that this is one of the worst things to ever come out of Goosebumps. And everybody knows about the episode, which I think is honestly more famous at this point than the book, often than not, when episodes were pretty much considered by the masses to be awful. They became like the poster child of the story compared to the book, sadly. But I have to say, this is not as bad as I remembered it, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself of what my thoughts are. But to give you an idea, would I recommend this book to you? If you are brand new eyes onto Goosebumps, or maybe you've read maybe 1 or 2 books and you want to see what else is out there in the series, I want to recommend this one early on. I would recommend that you actually put this one off towards the end, and you'll probably appreciate it a whole lot more than if you started with this thing. Because it's a little bit weird and different. But funnily enough, this book has been ripped on quite a few times. With modern Goosebumps, I should say. And I do think that you'll probably find more enjoyment early on with those over this. And to be honest, this honestly feels out of place in Goosebumps wholesale. But there is some qualities in it that I think is different enough to kind of praise. But we'll get into that near the end. But yeah, I want to recommend it to newer readers or people looking for just horror. But if you're an experienced reader, or maybe you're just a kid's horror aficionado, you should check this out. It's a little bit different than what you're normally going to get from a kid's horror book or story or movie or whatnot. But it does kind of offer something that you won't find anywhere else. So take that for what you will. So with that out the way, let's get into the plot overview of this thing without giving too much away. So the story starts off with the main character named Larry. He's a 12-year-old kid. He has blonde hair. He's a guitarist in this band called the Geeks, and he's heading out into a snowstorm, or there's snow on the ground outside, to go to band practice with his good friends. His friends are Lily, Manny, Christina, and Jared, I believe, and those are his bandmates. But Larry has this reoccurring problem pretty much in the first chapter that he tells the reader through his monologue that he keeps getting chased by dogs all the time, and they're like viciously chasing him in packs, trying to get after him and attack him. And that's one thing that I think you'll notice off the bat with this book, and as you're reading it, is that Larry has a more developed monologue than your average Goosebumps character, and he's written in such a intriguing way that, for better or for worse, this character is going to carry it for you. Larry is a pretty relatable character, as you come to know, but once he's evaded the dogs and his friends kind of rescue him, they bring him into band practice inside of, I think, Manny's house or something. And they start playing around, jamming out, whatnot, just, talking with each other, talking about this Battle of the Bands competition coming up in like a week or two. And they want to beat this other band who are basically rivals to them, but they're also kind of friendly. And Larry has this like vendetta with the drummer of the band. And why am I forgetting his name? I think his name is Howie. He's the drummer. And, it's just a slice of life conversation thing going on with these like first 25 pages along with that. But the kids decide to take a break after they're done practicing, and they head outside to play in the snow. And as they're working out in the snow, getting all, hot, throwing around snowballs, building snowmen and all that, Larry's trying to cool off a little bit, and he notices a house across the street with some abandoned stuff out by the mailbox. And he finds this like cabinet thing that's kind of portable, and inside there's a bunch of bottles and stuff, and he thinks it would be cool to like bring it to his friends and just look around and rummage inside. And this is all happening at random. This is like a random point of the story. And the kids look inside and they see this bottle of Instatan, which is just chilling in there, and it's pretty full. And they get this bright idea, because it's the winter and there's no sun out, maybe it'll be cool to get a tan before the competition and they'll look cool. So they decide to all go in the bathroom together and put this stuff on their, hands and face and all that. And there's a mild peer pressure element with Larry, where he has to watch his friends do this first. And now that I mentioned the name Harry, he has a nickname with his friend group called Harry Larry, because he has luscious blonde hair, and they kind of tease him for it because, he's kind of like that dreamy kid. And Larry doesn't like the nickname, but as you'll see, it kind of sticks. If you can't tell by the cover here, might give a little bit away, but Larry kind of grows his hair out. He tells you that because he's insecure about his ears. Larry has a lot of insecurity problems, as you'll get to know. But they all put the stuff on, and the stuff doesn't work like they intended to. And as they leave the bathroom, they go back outside. But there's a situation that happens where Larry gets all worked up, and he sees some dogs again. He falls down thinking that he's a goner. But when he wakes up, he's in his bed at home, and there's this doctor there injecting him with a needle. And Larry kind of reveals what happened is because he has a problem with his pores. So when he gets all hot and sweaty, his pores don't work the way they should. So he tends to faint. So he gets shots, I think, every 2 weeks to make him feel better. And the doctor gives him the shot, says, everything's okay now. And Larry's like feeling bad about it, but he also, he brings up the question to his mom, hey, do I look tanner? Do I look different? And she's like, no. But once the doctor leaves and Larry's by himself, he looks on his hands and starts to see thick black hair, like the cover hair, start to sprout on his hands. And he freaks out and he panics, and he contemplates at first whether he should tell somebody, or, maybe his friends might be going through this. You can see that contemplation, but his first initial reaction is to shave it off, because the last thing he wants to do is be embarrassed by this body hair. He doesn't want his parents to see it. He definitely doesn't want his peers to see it, because he already gets teased for his blonde hair. So he decides to shave it off and try to play it cool. Well, it comes into the next day, or soon after this event happens, and he's at school, and he's with his bandmates in his classroom, and he's called up to essentially present something to the class. And before he goes up to present, he looks down in his hands and he sees this black fur sprout up again. And this makes him feel insecure even more. And he runs out of the classroom, goes to this locker, grabs some gloves, puts them on, and then comes back to class so nobody notices. And he says in his monologue that he'd rather have it covered up and look weird than everybody notice the hair thing. And pretty much for the rest of the book here, this is literally the plot, y'all, and I'm not exaggerating this. It's just a bunch of random events starting to happen, or events to bring out this repetitive thing of Larry feeling insecure, right? So as the story goes along, he starts to, at first it's in his hands, but it comes across to a scene where he's contemplating telling his bandmates whether he should, contemplating telling them that he's starting to grow hair, and he wants to know if all of his friends are experiencing the same thing. He doesn't feel good one day because of the hair thing, so he misses band practice. Well, Part of that has to deal with another scene that happens at school where he has to go to gym class and he's in the locker room getting changed, and he notices that the hair is spread to his knees. So he's like, well, I didn't put the Instatan on my knees. There must be something else going on. Well, while all this is going on and while Larry's trying to figure this all out, his friends start to notice that when they go to band practice one day, that their friend Manny has kind of just up and disappeared. And they're like, well, something might be really wrong here. So they go to Manny's house and they realize that Manny has disappeared. His whole house is vacated. His parents are gone. It's like Manny never existed. Meanwhile, Larry is still being visited by dogs, and one dog seems to have curly hair and the same eyes that remind him of Manny. And the dog just kind of sits there and chills. And seems like he's trying to tell him something. But Larry, of course, is chased by dogs, and he gets this idea that something isn't right. He has another visit by his doctor. He gets another shot, and he wants to tell his parents the truth. And he's tried telling them. I've skimmed over this part, but he tried telling his mom when this hair keeps coming back, and it's starting to spread further, that this stuff has happened to him because he put on this Instatan. And when the doctor comes back, he's like, well, I want to tell him, but that might be kind of dumb to tell him. And then there's opportunities later where he feels like he can tell his dad about what's going on as well. But that kind of just feeds into it. But you can tell by, as the story goes along and as Larry keeps going through these similar situations, he's getting more and more perturbed by this hair that just keeps growing back. And it's kind of told in a mildly horrific way where it's like growing in his palms and the webbings of his fingers. It's really gross. And it's like spreading to the back of his neck, and he has to like cover it up, and it really exposes his insecurities that he had prior to these events happening to him in the story. Well, essentially, when one day, while at another thing of band practice, he is talking to his friend Lily, and his friend Lily essentially tells him without telling him that she might be growing hair too from the Instatan, so he thinks. And then she kind of disappears, and later on a dog comes to him wearing this coin that she has in the story. And there's also a thing about Lily with these uniquely colored eyes that also play into it. And he seems to think that Lily has turned into a dog somehow. And he tries to tell his parents, and his parents are like, yeah, right. And then once Lily leaves, he tries to chase her and all of that. And he goes to Lily's house, and her parents are there, but they say, you must have been mistaken. There is no Lily. And then the parents try to, begrudgingly tell him, like, just forget about her. She never happened. And Larry's like, I don't know who to believe. Am I crazy? Is all this stuff being, like, happening in psychosis? I don't know what's real and what's real, not real anymore. And all of us, it all culminates into a Battle of the Bands competition where Larry has shaved his whole body to prepare for the competition, because at this point of the story, he has to shave his forehead, and he gets on stage for the competition, and let's just say something happens to him that kind of exposes to everybody what he's been going through. And Larry, of course, runs away embarrassed and finds his parents, and his parents drop a huge bombshell. And that recontextualizes all the events in the story, which leads to the ending, where we get a catch-up of what's happened to Larry and what his life is like now. And there's a thing involving another character in the story. I'm not going to reveal what kind of character it is, but we get an update on that character too. And that essentially is what you're going to expect out of my Hairiest adventure. Now, I went over some details a little bit brief, and I actually didn't tell you a whole lot about some others, because if I give you any shred of further context, it'll probably spoil the whole book for you. But that in a nutshell, like I said, is what you're going to expect out of the book. And I have to say this off the bat, I do have some positives with this book. And I think a lot of people out there in the community do shortchange this book for having some really good writing quality. And I think that's probably the best strength this book really does have. I think Larry is a really likable character. He's super relatable. And the way he's written, he'll have these moments where he's thinking about telling his parents something, but he walks the reader through his mind and why he's not going to. And he does this numerous times, and he's very open and honest and authentic, and he feels relatable and real. And that's all you can really ask for. I think Larry's a great protagonist for a book like this, and what he goes through is pretty harrowing in terms of the body horror. It's not the scariest thing ever, but there's something, like I said, perturbing about this hair that keeps on returning on his body, no matter what he does to get rid of it. And like I said, you can clearly tell that Stein had an idea for this book and stuck with it, and that's probably the second biggest positive with it. The fact that Stein wanted to make a puberty allegory story, and in the fashion that he made it with, in terms of how he correlated it with Larry and his experience, it does play off like some realism. It plays into insecurities that kids have before they hit puberty, and puberty itself makes it more tumultuous and makes those insecurities become the forefront. It makes them more anxiety driven. It makes them more angsty. It makes them more self-conscious. And all these changes that are happening in the mind are also in direct correlation to what's happening to the body. And I think it's a great artistic way of showing puberty. Now, whether that's appropriate for kids' horror or not, I know this book is controversial because it is an allegory for puberty, is kind of beside the point here. I do think that the idea was thought out and actually planned for once in Goosebumps, or I can clearly tell that Stein was trying to do something with this book, and for the most part, it succeeded at executing that idea. And I will say this, some descriptive writing in here, while it's not the greatest that I've seen in Goosebumps, it is very Prowse heavy. There's a lot of atmosphere description. There's a lot of internal monologuing going on that makes the narrative of the book compelling. And for what it is, I will say this as one last positive to it as well. There is some idea of a mystery going on, whether it's predictable or not, whether there are a lot of predictable things in the story, like I said, is beside the point. There is something there to kind of grip you, and there is some intrigue as to what's really going on with Larry. Is it this instantaneous stuff? Is it perhaps this doctor giving him a shot? Or is it just puberty itself kind of coinciding with all of these things at once? You don't really know the answer until the end, which completely recontextualizes everything in a really goofy way. But we'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, some pretty sound positives for it. But I have to say, the negatives in this book are irritating to me, okay? And I'm going to start off with the first negative, and I think most people's biggest negative with the whole story is going to come down to this. I'm just going to start off with this, which I normally don't do, which is the ending. The ending recontextualization of this book, there is some decent setup in the book for it, but the way it was delivered, I felt was very cheap, and it almost completely ruined the book for me. Because I still maintain this idea that the way this book ended should not have been the way it ended. I feel like there should have been way more to the story. And when it does end, it ends in that goofy, cheesy Goosebumps way. And like I said, the reveal itself, there's some setup and payoff, but I hate it. Like I said, I wish there was a whole lot more to it. Which brings me to my second negative for the whole book as a whole. This book is meandering, okay? The first 25 pages, this slice of life stuff, you get to meet, Larry. He introduces, what's been going on, him being chased by dogs. He's in a band. You get to meet his bandmates. They just hang around for a little bit. They find some Instatan, put it on, yada, yada. And then the book finally kicks on around page 30 or so. And once it kicks on, there's just too many identical feeling scenes throughout the book where Larry finds hair, he's afraid, he manically shaves it, tries to hide it or something, and then he finds another event where it's conveniently going to have him be in the public forum or around people that can stare at him, and he notices his hair is sprouted back. It's that kind of stuff going on. It is pretty repetitive. And there's not enough mystery here to make the story more engaging. In fact, my third negative to the book is that it's pretty predictable from the jump street, with the whole idea being put out there about this band competition. In your mind, especially if you're a seasoned Goosebumps veteran, you're either going to expect that's going to be the climax, and that's where all the stuff is going to be dumped, and the big bang of the story is going to happen, or the changing point, I should say. Or it could be one of those Goosebumps books where you introduce something early on and it never means anything by the end. But this was one of those books that had an obvious Chekhov's gun with the band competition, and we all know to expect the band competition to be the turning point of the story. So, reading all these events where he's in the bathroom a couple times, or he's at band practice and finds hair, or he's in front of his classroom and finds hair again. He's in the gym, finds more hair. It's really lame. And I feel like the puberty allegory is a little bit too overdone, and it needs more typical Goosebumps in there to make it pop. As a matter of fact, this is another negative to it. For me personally, I wish this book had a genuine villain, and there's plenty of room there with the Doctor. And here's the thing, the sequence of events in the early part of the book do get under my skin a little bit, because the way it was done, I feel like could have been tweaked. Instead of Larry starting off the story being chased by dogs, going to band practice, meandering around, then finding the Instatan, what I would have done is, Larry's getting chased by dogs. He passes out early on. He gets ejected with a shot from the Doctor for his poor deficiency, right? He then gets better. He goes to band practice soon after, which got postponed because of him. His friends are cool with it and ask him if he's okay. They're having practice and whatnot. They head outside. Larry finds the Instatan. They have the whole moment in the bathroom, but the moment right after Larry puts it on, he immediately notices the hair. And the hair starts to sprout on him, and he runs away in embarrassment. He heads home to try to figure out how to fix it, and he figures out that he can shave it off. But as the story goes along, his friends, after putting the Instatan on, only 2 have like a rash. Let's say it's Manny and his friend Lily. And because they have a rash, they're also visited by the same doctor, who give them a shot, and Manny up and disappears from the story. Instead of his family completely moving away, maybe his parents are wondering what happened to Manny or something like that. They don't know where he is. Same thing happens to Lily later on. Her parents are worried about Lily. Now Lily's run away, and meanwhile Larry's still going through his transformation, so to speak, I guess. But there could be a revelation near the end about the Doctor possibly being behind all of this, and he's been experimenting with animal DNA to possibly cure kids or cure ailments within humans, and he's decided to use these kids as guinea pigs. And these dogs that have been chasing him, and the story can have some context, they're actually dogs of other kids that he's turned into dogs, and he's pretty much trained them, or is forcing them to hunt down his intended kids that he thinks he can add to his repertoire of dogs. That's just the idea I would have gone with. It's a little over the top, but in my opinion, it feels a lot like the villain from Beethoven, if you've ever seen that movie from the 90s. I think that's what should have been here, with some goofy Goosebumps shenanigans. And Larry and his friends didn't have to be what they are at the end, necessarily, unless you want to go dark with it. But it makes the story more at home with Goosebumps. It recontextualizes the story in a more frightening way, in a more diabolical way. And I like that better than what we got. Now, back to the coming of age stuff. While it is kind of nice to see, because Larry's such a nice character, it doesn't really help the monotony overall. It's just a boring book. Like, nothing happens throughout most of it. It's pretty repetitive. I think the twist is really bad. I don't like it whatsoever. There's some random parts of the story I can really beat over the head, like, why did Manny just up and vanish with his whole family? And it's never really explained why Manny's family particularly left. It's just kind of there in the story, and a lot of stuff felt like it was a bit too overdramatic for its own good. And some of the dialogue, even, if I'm being honest, felt like it was written for a kid's show, like on Disney Channel. It felt like it didn't really feel like real humans were talking. Even though Larry's monologue felt real, when they talked, it was just, cheesy. I don't know what else to say. It's just, it's bogged down by these things. You know what I mean? And if the book, like I said, maybe perhaps was more scary or had more than a one-trick pony idea about puberty, this could have been something. But I feel like Stein just actually stayed in a lane for once, and he didn't find the pizzazz to put into it. And it's just missing the pizzazz to make it good. You know what I mean? And I know that's a divisive opinion out there for some people that maybe love this book, but that's just how I feel. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, y'all, if I'm being honest, it was not getting a good, which is a 3.5 or higher for me, so it's getting less than that. And if I'm being honest, I was really teetering on this or like a 0.1 difference higher. But for me to say that something's like meh or not good, not bad, there has to be some overwhelming potential I can see with it, given its parameters, including in the story. Even with the potential this book had, it still falls down into that weird territory, and I don't think that even with the potential it did had, it would have been necessarily good if it had those things, but it's definitely something I would have preferred. But given what we got here, honestly, it's not the worst thing ever like people have said, but I also don't think it's not good, not bad either. I actually do think it's mildly bad. So I decided to give this thing less than a 3 out of 5 stars and give it a 2.9 out of 5 stars. It's very close to a 3, which is not good, not bad, or meh for me. But the reason why I'm settling it here is because of the mixed bag nature to this book. It has some decent, good qualities to it, but it's weighed down, story-wise, enjoyment-wise, and all of that by those problems. It almost feels, like I said early on, it's very out of place for the series, and I'm not going to knock books that feel different because it's different, but I feel like this book just, it needs more than what it has to be something special, and I just don't feel like it breaches that whatsoever. It kind of feels undercooked, and Stein really didn't know what to do. Like I said, what he did provide with the character writing and stuff and the Prouse was really good, but other than those writing compliments, without that, and maybe you replace Larry with a terrible character, this might possibly be one of my least favorite Goosebumps books. Like I said, Larry was good and the writing was good, so it did save it, though. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on My Hairiest Adventures book. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.